Dear Lord, all we really need is you, and that would be enough. Lord, we're missing Lorraine today, but help us to keep our eyes focused on you. Help us to open our hearts to your word and the truths that you would share us today. Let us see that you are sufficient and that you are always enough. We love you and we praise you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I think hopefully it will be obvious over the course of teaching this particular lesson that why God kind of laid this on my heart. But as I was preparing this lesson, it's a lesson about the feeding of the 5,000. But in a way, I really think it's about building God's kingdom. And hopefully you'll see that. For whatever reason, it made me think of kind of our journey to launching this church. And I remember when they had a meeting at West University Baptist Church to see people who would volunteer to come and volunteer to help set up the church. And I'm looking around, and comparatively speaking to the number of people who gathered to launch Crosspoint, which was the church that we launched a few blocks away. And I remember, there was 70 or 80 families, and had launched Crosspoint. I remember being in West University Baptist Church and looking around at all the people and thinking to myself, there's not very many people here, and how are we going to have enough? Because in my own mind, Lorraine's and I's, we were thinking, we'll be one of those people that visits every other week type thing, which is kind of like most of people who are now. And I was thinking about, especially when I went around and I'd ask, what is your plan? Oh, I'm going to come once a month. And I was like, really? What's your plan? Oh, I'm going to come every other week. And I got to thinking, well, how in the world are we going to do this? How are we going to have enough? And God has a wonderful economy. He has an economy of plenty. There is always enough. And I began to think to myself, and it again resonated with me when we went off to start activities on Thursdays nights. We kind of, that organically grew, and then we finally just decided to step out into it. And how are we going to do that? How are we going to find the volunteers? How are we going to have? Well, everybody found their little place and their little activity to do. And now, if you come here on a Thursday night, the church is really just thriving, and it's just full of life and activity. And it's really a blessing to see that going on. You wonder how it's going to be done, but God always gets it done, and that's really what this lesson is about the miracle that is God, and how He, whatever is in His will, He always gets it done. So without further ado, the actual passages are Mark 30 through 44. So it starts, the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They went away in the boat to a secluded place by themselves. The people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities, and got there ahead of them. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate, and it is already quite late. Send them away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go look. And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. And he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up toward heaven. He blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces, and also the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves. So as you know, one of my big things is, it's always interesting, you should always view where you're going in the context of where you've been. Obviously, one of the things that happened 2 passages ago was that that he had sent his disciples out to go spread the news of his coming kingdom, but then there was this interlude where we talked about Herod, and Steve was talking about kind of drawing the short straw about getting that. Really, I think there is. This has a place, and there's 2 reasons. If you look at the other gospel, one of the reasons that it's here is because the disciples, Jesus found out about that Herod had been killed during this time, and so that's why it's the recollection of what happened is placed here. But I also think that the reason that God laid it on Mark's heart to go ahead and put it in there is to contrast the way that Herod ran his kingdom versus the way that Jesus built God's kingdom. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. If we have enough time at the end, we can talk about what your thoughts may have been comparing and contrasting the 2. But this is really about Jesus building his kingdom. So let's start. I think I need to do this manually at least to get us started.
Is it on?
Oh, is it on? Of course.
Yep. That helps.
Yes! It is not on. So the first thing I want to point out to you, so verse 30, it says, the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And one of the things that I think is really neat about this passage is, so he sends the disciples, and when he sends them away, they're disciples. In fact, the word apostles is not used in Mark at all until this point. So he sends them away disciples, and they come back apostles. And that's, to me, that's really neat, because apo means sent out. So apostles comes from the word apostolos, which means apo, sent out, and stello, which means prepared for, equipped. And so by that time, Jesus had sent them out prepared and equipped. So they had transformed from disciples into apostles. And so they're coming back, having gone out disciples, they're coming back apostles. So the apostles gather together. And of course, they gathered together with Jesus. And what did they do? They reported to him. What did they report? They report all they had done and taught. And it's interesting to me, and I guess the first point is that Jesus started building his kingdom with what we might call in today's parlance a small group, right? A home group, whatever word you want to call it, but a small group. So it was Jesus and just his 12 disciples, which is 13 people. It's a small group. And and I think that's it's interesting. They reported to him, and what they reported to him is all that they've done. So the question is, well, you know, what did this setting serve? And I think what it did is why they reported to him is the kind of things that small groups encourage, and what they encourage is they encourage accountability. When you're spending a lot of time in a small group setting and you're really sharing people what you're doing in their lives, there's a certain accountability that comes with us. Like, you're going to live the life, you're going to walk it out, and even if somebody's not just checking up on you to say, hey, how did you handle this situation? Just hearing other people walking out their lives brings that sense of accountability to yourself. And that sense of accountability only it deepens when you share. It's also an opportunity for encouragement. I think one of the ways the enemy really tries to slow down believers or stop them is simply to discourage them, to get them to feel like they can't make an impact, they can't make a difference. So it provides encouragement. And then when things go bad, and times are hard, and times are troubling, it gives the opportunity for one another, for us to be comforted. And finally, I think it gives you the opportunity, because in a smaller group, is that you're able to share more that you just cannot share in a larger group. So it gives you it gives you more transparency, which makes you more authentic, which makes you kind of dive down into the deep things, which I believe is why small groups are so important. And of course, what they shared to him is not only about what they've done, but what they've taught. And I think part of the reason of sharing it with Jesus was, the interesting thing in a small group dynamic, you may have people who are in charge of a small group in the sense that they are organizationally in charge, but in a healthy setting, you should have different people leading out in different ways and sharing different things and offering wisdom. So what I think the other thing that it offers is the role that Jesus plays here, is it offers the opportunity for correction, and the opportunity for edification and guidance. Because if you think about it, well, you say, well, somebody asked me about this while I was teaching, and I said this. Jesus, what do you think about this? And Jesus said, well, I would say it more correctly this way. Or if guidance, it's like, I encountered this situation, Lord, how would you have dealt with it? And when you're in a small group, you can share like that and get the guidance and wisdom for people who may have encountered similar situations. So it gives you, and then you get the wisdom of a group of believers sharing together, and you get the discernment of a group of believers all trying to build each other up. And so that's the power of this group, and this group is led by the greatest small group leader of them all, of course, Jesus. Then it says, and he said to them, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while. And so Jesus recognized the importance of kind of going off to a place where you're not in the midst of serving, to come and recharge and refuel. And for everybody, one of those places for you should be in your time when you're praying and you're meditating personally. That should be where you connect personally with God. That should be a place where you reconnect with God and focus on Him and get re-energized and refueled. But the small group serves the same function while they were not with the world at large. They were in a small group of people, again, where they could rest, they could be at ease, because they were in a setting where they were being encouraged and built up, and not facing the challenges that may be out there in the world. And then it says, he says, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while, for there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So the problem with this particular place is apparently Jesus wanted everybody to rest. But they were having problems with people coming, no doubt wanting things. And so this, Mark writes, and they did not even have time to eat. I'm sure Mark was, my personal belief is that Mark was written from the perspective of Peter. Like most of the content that's shared in Mark is kind of Peter's perspective. And so this is something that Peter was emphasizing, is like there were so many people going around, we didn't even have time to eat. Verse 32, it says, they went away in the boat to a secluded place by themselves. The people saw them going, and many recognized them and ran there together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of them. And so one of the reasons I chose this particular drawing, this art rendering of the feeding of the 5,000, is because it shows you the water and the boat that they came in on the shore. So once again, they get into their boat and they're looking for a secluded place, right, to go by themselves. But that's not what happened, because what happens is people see them get in the boat and they realize they're going somewhere. And of course, by this time, Jesus is the people are enamored by Jesus, and they can see that he's doing powerful works among them. And so they recognized that this was Jesus and his disciples, and they ran. So Jesus is going in a boat, and obviously these people, a couple of things about it, they ran, and not only did they run, but apparently they ran, and as they ran, other people were like, where are you going? We're going to get to Jesus. He's going across on the boat. And so then people from the other cities, as they ran around, started joining them too. And they got there ahead of them, even though they're going in a straight line by boat. The people were going and running. And a couple of things that I just wanted to emphasize about that is, first of all, the people who got there are highly motivated. These are people who are willing to run as fast as they can to try to get to the other side before Jesus does. Obviously, if they ran and they were able to get there before Jesus did, they were not burdened by carrying a whole lot, right? They didn't have things like food. And of course, as I said, the further they ran, then people would come beside them. And I'm sure only a few people, or a smaller group, not the entire 5,000, were the people who had got there ahead of Jesus. But they obviously attracted quite a lot of attention, and so it drew a very large crowd. And then it says, when Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them, because they were sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And so Jesus was looking for an opportunity to pour into his disciples. But when he saw them, he was moved with compassion. And specifically because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And you think about it, that's when you hear that phrase, it really resonates with us. You hear they were like sheep without a shepherd. And I think it's because, in a sense, we intuitively get what that means, because shepherd are kind of cute and fuzzy and cuddly at least looking. I don't know. I've never actually held a sheep. I don't know. When I went to the petting zoo, they were not nearly as fluffy as the stuffed toy versions. But you know, they evoke a certain compassion. But when you think about sheep without a shepherd, you think about, you know, you guide me, you lead me into green pastures and beside still waters, right? Is part of the role of the sheep is of the shepherd is to lead them to places where they can get rich food that will help them and water for them to drink. They don't have very strong natural defenses. They are, they're not very fast. And so because of that, the way they protect themselves is they just go in flocks. But unfortunately, because of that, that means they're kind of largely left at the behest of whoever's going forward. And if that person chooses the wrong way, they can go into bad places, or places that will not necessarily sustain them or provide for them. The role that the shepherd plays is that he knows where the food is good and he knows where the water is, so he can take care of those sheep and guide them to where they need to be. But also, because of their nature, because they don't have strong natural defenses, they are prone to predators. So the other thing he does is the shepherd protects them. The reason the shepherd has a staff is not only to pull them when they get stuck into a tight place, pull them out, but also to fend off predators if they should come after. And then finally, if they're not cared for, they can become prone to parasites, and they can become prone to injuries, especially with their hooves. And a shepherd who takes care of them keeps them healthy and disease-free. So to be without a shepherd is to be not knowing where your next meal is, how you're going to feed yourself, maybe not getting fed, maybe not getting what you need, being prone to those who would prey upon you, and then be prone to living in a way that's unhealthy for you and that is not good for you. So that's what it means to be a sheep without a shepherd.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yeah, so I just see that here at the church, you know, that we can bring those that are lost in our neighborhoods right here. And I'm speaking just like in our apartment units across the street. Apartment number 2, which is T-Bone, came. And it was just so amazing to see that he walked through the door looking for the food, and then it was just beautiful to see. And I just wish that we get more that are lost out there to come through the doors and just have a harvest. And then just right now there's 13 people in here, just like our reading about the dynamics of the apostles, disciples, and it's just beautiful because I already feel that encouragement every time we come back, and then like a family life style here, and just the comfort, the transparency, the wisdom that y'all share with me and our families. Thank you for that.
I appreciate that, and just to kind of, I had a similar moment a couple of weeks ago. Kind of organically, how we started doing it on Thursday nights is Lorraine decided she wanted to do this thing called Jesus Fit, which she does on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Robert was like, hey, I think we should get that basketball thing we're going to do started. And then we got together and say, okay, well, since Lorraine's already doing it on Thursdays and it works for our schedule, let's do it on Thursdays. And then we organized everything. And everybody came together and we rearranged, and now there's just a lot of activities here. But the moment that really just warmed my heart was the second Thursday that we'd done it. We came in and there was the boys it was a gym filled with little boys playing, and we didn't spend a lot of time talking with God, but we poured a lot of love into them. And at the end, we talked a little bit with them and prayed with them. And it was just very heartwarming and very encouraging to me, because that's the kind of way, that's what a church should look like. It should be bringing people who don't have, or who are looking or searching, and just being pouring in and connecting with them, and hopefully the parents that bring those children. And then one of the other things we started is, after the boys get done with basketball, a group of Hispanic men, mostly Hispanic, I also play with them, play soccer together, and they're bringing their families too. And my hope is, the entirety of what we did with them was, in terms of religious, was simply to prayer, open before we played soccer, open in prayer. But my hope is that those men will connect with the men in the church that are also coming, that the wives will connect with one another, and then they'll say, hey, we want to come and see what the church is about here on Sunday, and that will bring people in. And it's just by just sharing a little love with people, so I thought that was really beautiful, that we gave him some food, and so he decided to come check us out, and that's the way I hope it will be. Well, what did Jesus do when he got on shore? What was his reaction with them? When he saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd, well, he began to pour into them. There's 4 different versions of the feeding of the 5,000. It's one of the stories from the Gospels that is in all 4 Gospels. There's not that many, but this is one of them. And in other passages it says that he did some healing. Well, it was there. Jesus did heal people, but what Mark focuses on is that what he did that was most striking to him is that the way he reacted to this coming crowd is he used this as an opportunity to teach. And obviously that's why so many people depict it as there being mountains, is because the way he could teach 5,000 people is he could stand up and then teach to the people who were gathered below. And so Jesus did what he did best, which is teach them about God and his kingdom. But obviously he spent quite a bit of time with that, because again we see it says, when it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, this place is desolate and it is already quite late. So, who is aware that it's already quite late? It's the disciples. And why do we know that? Because they tell him, Jesus, it is late. Take time, we need to move on. And so what do they want? What is his disciples? And this is another thing, is look what they've turned back into. They've gone back from being the apostles back to being the disciples, right? Which is there's people that need to be themselves taught. And so it's already quite late. And so what does his disciples want him to do? They want them, the disciples want Jesus to send the crowd away. That's what they want them to do. And why do they want they want them to go away so that they may go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So Jesus, you need to send these people away so that they can get themselves something to eat. And it's not said here, but the subtext is, Jesus, we've been at this all day and we haven't eaten. We need to eat, so you need to send them away so that they can go off and they can provide for themselves, and so that we can eat, so we can take care of ourselves. And so what is Jesus' answer? You give them something to eat. Don't send them away, you feed them. And my reaction is, whenever we face these situations, it's kind of like looking around the church and going, how are we going to have enough? The reaction is, the same as my own, which is they said to him, shall we go and spend 200 denarii on bread and give them something to eat? It's like, well, how can we do this? Look around. We have such limited resources. We only have so much time. We only have so much people. We only have so much money. How are we going to do this? The logistics don't work out for me. How is all this going to come together? How are we going to open a church? Surely, if Crosspoint taught me anything, you need at least 70 families to accomplish anything. How are we going to do it? Because with so few, and those so few not having the resources of 70 families, how are we going to do it all? And that's the way you think. And so Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go look. And they found out, and they said 5 and 2 fish. So the first thing he says is, how many loaves do you have? Go look. And to me, what Jesus is saying to me here is, don't think about what you don't have. Think about what you do have, right? That's the place to start. Don't think about what you don't have. Think about what you do have. So they look and they say, he says, they go, and then when they found out, which meant, obviously, if say when they found out, they didn't know what they already had, right? They didn't think about what they already had. They had to go out and find that. Often, because we're so focused on what we think we need, that we overlook what God has given to us. We also have these preconceptions about how things should be done, and when things should be done, and what we should be doing, and how we should be doing it. And so, rather than just take advantages of what God has provided, we look at all these obstacles because we think we have to do it at a certain time in a certain way, and with certain resources that we don't necessarily need. And so God's message is, the first place to start is look and see what you do have and start from there, right? And of course, when they examined the fish situation, they said, oh, well, look, we've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. They found out that they had something they had. And then the reason they didn't know that they had it is because, in truth, the disciples didn't have it. Again, I said there's 4 different versions of the feeding of the 5,000. What you learn from the John version, which is in chapter 6 of John, is one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, apparently went out and found this kid, right? And so this little guy here is the lad that he found. He's, look, I brought, and what did he have? He had the little lad here has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. So apparently one boy packed a dinner when he came, or packed some food, and so they find, well, we've got at least some food here. It's a starting place, but of course, even so, the reaction of the disciples is the same. Is, what are these for so many people? Again, they're focused not on what they do have, but on what they don't have. And that again, I guess, is what my heart was thinking about, is how we think in our own minds. We don't know how God's doing it. We don't know how God is going to bring it all together, and so we focus on our limitations, and it's not enough, and that starts us from starting the work. We think to ourselves, there's not enough people, there's not enough money, or worse yet, the one that people actually voice as an objection all the time. I don't know enough to be qualified to do anything, to be a minister, to be engaged in ministry. Like, I need to get better educated. And if you know and have a relationship with God, you know more than most people, right? And so as I like to say, the calling is the qualification. If God calls you to do something, you are qualified because God called you to do it, right? And then so we get to see a little bit of the way Jesus goes about his particular leadership style. So it says, and he commanded them, he being Jesus, commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. So his reaction to the situation is to bring order out of the chaos. And so the first thing he says is, I want everybody to split up into large groups and sit down. And so the question is, how did sitting down help everybody? Any thoughts?
There's not chaos if everybody's sitting down, because if you're in, it's like a teacher, like you want everybody to sit down so you know where all the heads are.
Right.
If everybody's walking around, then you don't know where everybody's at.
Right, if people are milling around, if everybody sat down in a place and they're not milling around, you can make sure that everybody is taken care of, right? Because if a person starts over there and goes over there, well, they may not get fed because they went over from there to there. But if everybody sat down, you can take care of them. And then the second thing is, why would they want him to? They take this large group and they have them. He said, have them sit down in groups of about 50 each. And splitting up into groups of 50, how did that help?
Well, there's such a great number. If you set them in like groups of 5 or 10, like there's too many to be serviced at one time. He only has 12 disciples. If you separate them in 50 each, then you service more. If you worked in a servicing industry, then you know that he's going to move quickly. They only have so many people to help.
Right.
You know who takes care of who.
You divide the labor, right, amongst the disciples. I like the way you're thinking. You're thinking the way Jesus wants you to think. You're splitting those people up into groups. And then not only can the disciples serve those groups, but they only have a limited number of groups, so they don't have to keep track of the groups they're saying. They're saying, okay, you've got group number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're there. They're large. You can't miss them. You'll know when you've been to your group, right? And so that's what he did. And so he comes up with a plan for organizing the people so that to make sure that everybody gets fed, because that's the goal here, to make sure that everybody gets fed.
Well,
So he
just
takes
think
it.
too, if you put them in groups of 10 and you have 5,000, by the time you get to group 100, the first 10 are already finished. They're up walking around. Like you gotta think, like he's thinking, how do I keep all this order?
Mm-hmm.
And he's watching his flock. Like he's a shepherd watching his flock. You have to think.
He's
There's no video cameras.
He's come up with a plan to feed everybody. And if you think about it, we've seen Jesus and his small group, and he splits those up into groups of about 50, which I will tell you, a group of 50 is probably a really big Sunday school class, maybe 50 to 100, or maybe if you're in a smaller church, maybe the size of a small church service. If you're in a mega church, that's probably a Sunday school class, right? So it breaks up, making sure that everybody is fed and everybody is connected with, right?
And I think it also helps the disciples know kind of who they're responsible for.
Yes.
Because
No.
if they see the 5,000, they're like, I can't do that.
Right.
But, okay, I have this group or these groups. It takes kind of some of the angst, I think, even for the disciples out to say, okay, this is kind of my plan.
Right. Yes, absolutely. It helps not only Jesus know, okay, there's these large groups, we can tell which groups are being served, but it limits the number. You can assign specific disciples to specific groups, and then those, okay, Peter, you take care of this set, Andrew, you take care of this set, John, you take care of this set, And so it does. And in our own ways, when we organize into smaller groups, it helps us, because if you think about it, you're just one person. You look at it, a congregation is, how can I possibly pour into everybody in this congregation? How can I possibly meet their needs? And by that, I mean in particular spiritual needs. How can I make a difference to them spiritually? I can't, but if we break down into smaller groups, then we do, because the people within those groups then can minister to one another, right?
Well, and you have to think about the apostles. They can't see the people, because it's kind of like you can't see the trees from the forest. So if that's them, they can't see a person, because all they see is the crowd. So when Jesus gives them a group, like they're saying, oh, well, we only have this small group, instead of we have this huge crowd.
Right, and so it's like this, rather than, this multitude that I can't, here's your little flock.
Yeah, they no
You
longer
take
see
care
the
of it.
rest of the group. They just see this.
Then the shepherd makes them shepherds.
Yeah.
Right? He teaches them to be shepherds of their own little groups, right? Exactly. Okay, and so it says he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass, and they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. So the people do as they're asked. They do sit down. They're not going to do exactly as they're asked, right? He said 50s, and but it's hard to divide, because these are my friends. These are the people that come from my city. These are the people that are in my stage of life, or whatever, however it is we organize ourselves. So you may not get nice and neat groups of 50s, but people will generally do as they're asked, and they split up into the groups. And then it says, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking upward toward heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them, and he divided up the 2 fish among them all. So the first thing I want to emphasize is that he's looking up toward heaven, and by that I mean that he's looking to God, right? He's looking to God for provision. You think you have enough, you don't have enough, you think you can't do it all by yourself. You know what? You're right. You cannot do it on your own. You cannot do it on your own strength. But here is the message: God can, right? God can do it. Jesus knows that. That's why the first thing he does is, when he gets the fish that he's been provided, the 12 disciples he's been provided, the food from the little boy that he's been provided, the first thing he does is he comes to God, looks to God on how this is going to be distributed. And then it says he broke the loaves, and when Jesus divides, he multiplies. And there's amazing quality of how that happens. What you'll see in a growing, thriving church is those little classrooms or those little small groups start to grow, and then they get to be too large, too unwieldy to serve their purpose, and then they're split. And that is how God multiplies. He divides and martiples. So the question is, though, all the miracles that Mark records is because they struck the disciples as having profound spiritual significance that went beyond the mere act or quality of what was being done. And so the question is, what is the spiritual significance of this? And there was a very deliberate spiritual significance, as there was to everything that Jesus did. So the question is, what is the bread? Does that remind anybody of anything? Yes, absolutely. Mark 14, while they were eating, he took some bread, and after blessing, he broke it. So, right, we've just seen him break the bread, and think about the way that it's phrased in that particular passage. Jesus broke the loaves. He broke the bread, right? And in his later in Mark 14, we'll see at the Last Supper, while they were eating, he took some bread, and after blessing, just as here, after blessing to God, he broke it. And he gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body," right? So the bread represents Jesus. And of course, there's always enough Jesus to go around, right? And then here, another passage. This one is in John 6. And if you think that for any reason that maybe the interpretation that interpreting the bread as Jesus' body is too strong an interpretation, as we saw earlier, the passage of the feeding of the 5,000, it comes from John 6. Well, after the feeding of the 5,000, then there is a miracle that's also common to four Gospels where Jesus walks on water. But after he gets to the other side, then he starts teaching them. And when he teaches them, this is one of the things he makes about, points he makes. He says that he talks about the error of those who follow him simply because they're looking to satisfy their physical needs, simply because they're looking to satisfy their bellies, feed their bellies. He says, "Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread out of heaven to eat." Jesus then said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world." Then they said to him, "Lord, always give us this bread." And Jesus said, "I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst." So literally after the feeding of the 5,000, he makes the point that I am the bread of heaven. I am the bread of life, right? And then it says, going back to the passage, it says he divided up the two fish. And so then the question are, what are the fish? And I will say to you that this is unlike the bread, where Jesus specifically makes the connection between the bread and himself after the feeding of the 5,000. The fish is subject to a little more interpretation. But what do we think? What do we think the fish are? Okay. This is what I think. It's where we began in Mark 1. As he was going down by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net in the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." So, I think that the fish are believers. They are people who who are brought into the kingdom of God. They are caught by people who are fishing for them, who then themselves become fisher of men, right? And that is what the Great Commission is all about. So he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up toward heaven. He blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he kept giving them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all. And so after blessing the food and beginning to divide it, he then starts to distribute it. And of course, how does he go about doing that? He gives it to his disciples. And it says to them, the disciples to set before them to give to the people. And I think you can see here that is what is being said, that he is giving them to his disciples for the purpose of the disciples are then going to distribute it to the people. And just in case, that's exactly what that is saying, because if you look at the version of the feeding of the 5,000 that's in Matthew, you'll see that he ordered the people to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food, and breaking the loaves, he gave them to disciples. The first thing he did, he gave them to disciples, and what's made more clear here is that then the disciples gave them to the crowds. In other words, he wasn't giving them to the disciples to eat themselves. He was giving them so that they could then go and feed the crowds. So as we had talked about, essentially each of the disciples was responsible. And we see in this particular photograph the disciples going out to each of the groups to provide them with food. And so then it says they all ate and were satisfied. And again, this is all, right? They all ate. So not some, not most, not the overwhelming majority, not almost everyone, all ate. Everyone ate. Everyone was fed, right? Everyone was fed, and most importantly, not only was everyone fed, but everyone was satisfied. There was no more than enough to meet everyone's needs. There was always enough Jesus to go around, right? There's never too little Jesus. There is always enough Jesus more. In fact, if anything, people need to get more second helpings of Jesus, right? There is always enough Jesus to go around. And Great Commission, it is a wonderful process of multiplication, because a good fisherman can catch many fish, who then turn into many fishermen, who can then go out and catch more fish. And that's how the gospel has spread and spread and spread and spread. That is God's economy. That is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. That is the miracle of the feeding of the world. And it says they picked up 12 full basketfuls. They picked up 12 full baskets of the broken pieces and also of the fish. There were 5,000 men who ate the loaves. Okay, so 12 basketfuls. And this is what is really truly astounding when you get involved in ministry, that has never ceased to amaze me, is that it is not that you won't get tired. It is not that you won't expend your energy. It is not that there will not be times that are hard, and there will not be times when you feel like, oh, I just don't feel like it, or whatever. But always, 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 if you pour into God's ministry and you are in God's will, you will receive back more than you gave. And it just works that way, and anybody who's done it knows it. That's the way God's economy. You cannot give as much as you're going to get back, because that's just the way God's economy works. Because pouring on all of those people, they pour back into you. It says 5,000 men ate the loaves, and just so you could. We say 5,000 men, but this is just focusing on the men, and this is not using men in the more generic sense. This is literally 5,000 males, and this is made express in other gospels. There are in Matthew again, it makes the point that there were 5,000 men who ate besides women and children. So it was just not men there. There was 5,000 men, and with them women and children. So exactly how many were gathered there, not known, but 5,000 men. And so the last question is, they picked up 12 full baskets. And so what are those 12 baskets? And that's the reason I chose this particular thing. It's because I don't know why they have all these baskets. I think this is one of those pictures where you have several points in time. It depicts several points in time in the picture. But what you see is that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 baskets, and they're all full. They're all being filled. they're all being filled, because some of them have got food in them and some of them not. But obviously, this is a work in progress. We know that ended up with 12 full baskets. So what are the 12 full baskets? What?
The disciples?
The okay.
Or the tribes of Israel.
And I think it's both. I mean, that the Jesus' choice of 12 disciples, I think, was very deliberate. It was to invoke the 12 tribes of Israel. So again, it says they picked up. So what it says they picked up the 12 full baskets, and of course the they is referring to the disciples. And again, so after going through this and after feeding everybody, John clarifies this. He says, when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost. Right? So as part of this exercise of feeding these 1,000, he's making the point to him, I want you to understand how God's economy works. Right? Now that you've fed everybody, everybody is getting up and going away. I want you to go after them, and I want you to pick up what's left over. Each of you go out and pick up a basket. So each of these disciples goes out. He's like, couldn't we just leave the food? No. We don't want to lose anything, right? And so go out and get the food. And so they do, and they end up with 12 full basketfuls of leftover fragments, one each for each of the disciples, one full basket for each of the disciples, right? And again, so that nothing will be lost, does this remind you of anything, right? Well, I think the other thing that this is talking about is we started off with the theme, is he saw them and they were like sheep without a shepherd. And his emphasis on nothing being lost is that lost sheep. And Jesus he says in other places about his ministry that his initial mission was to go out and to preach to the what he refers to as the lost sheep of Israel, right? The 12 tribes of Israel. So I think that this is because that's where he began. As I've said before, that the Jewish people, why were they chosen? Well, they were chosen because they were a people to be uniquely prepared to receive and then go and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ, which they did. We talk about people of Israel as Jews, but those people who are the Jewish people who became, who received Jesus when he came and went and spread the gospel, are just now known as Christians, right? And so the 12 full basketfuls also represent the lost, the people of Israel who he was going to serve. And this is important because later you will see that there's another miracle of the feeding. This one, however, is to a very different group, and he's making a different point later. And in fact, I don't think Mark covers this, but there will be a feeding of the 4,000, and in that particular case, his focus has now turned from feeding the people of Israel to feeding the Gentiles. And that group is a group of, those 4,000 are a group of Gentile believers. Okay, so let me see what time it is. Well, we're out of time. So you will just have to think by yourselves and discuss and have animated discussions over lunch or dinner about what were the differences in the styles between Jesus and Herod. What were their focuses on? Because they were obviously very different. I mean, what a contrast between a raucous party where, a likely drunken Herod he agrees he'll give up to half his kingdom to his daughter, who is obviously dancing in some way for him. And then he ends up having to give a head as the prize because her mother. So versus what Jesus did. I mean, just think about the contrast, and I think that contrast was very deliberate. I chose this particular picture because this looks like he's got like 5 o'clock shadow, so I thought it may look like a fusion between Herod and Jesus, but you know, maybe that's just me. Anyway, dear Lord, help us to never grow weary and lose heart. Help us to always keep our eyes focused on you and to recognize that you are a God of plenty. There is always enough of you to go around, and that if we just look to you and rely upon you and on your power, that we will be able to do whatever it is you call us to do, because you never call anyone unless you equip them, and you never call anyone unless you qualify them. So Lord, help us to truly take that heart so that we can go out and boldly do what you have called us to do. We love you and we praise you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So before we go,